Jim sitting up here on the panel, I'm not big on secondhand information. I do want to note that Hayden Cogshaw's walking up. Hayden Cogshaw was the last paid full-time selectman in the state of Massachusetts. That is significant, people. A big hand for Hayden. They took his number. Okay, I just want to, this is the Bourne Historical Society, and it's real quick. It says, Dear Skip, thanks for the kind invitation for February 25th, 2012. Sorry I will not be able to attend. Jane and I will be on vacation in Florida and not be back in Bourne until the first week in April. Since the end of the full-time selectmen, there have been many changes. I'm really reading this for the first time. I haven't seen it before. Charter change, how to better finance goals, large participation by members of the community, to name a few. My time as a full-time selectman was, I would say, more serious. For the most part, as you remember, I was elected to abolish full-time positions and get the finance house in order. I was sort of like a skunk at a lawn party. Well, Bob and Marie were one of the party and I was the outsider. We all worked for the good of the taxpayers of the town of Bourne. Thanks again, Skip. Sorry, Jan and I won't be in town on the 25th. Best wishes to all and have a great night. And this is to everybody. Sincerely, Jim Malatos. So that was Jim's take on it, and Jim was a good selectman. He put his time in, and so that's it for Jim. Not Jim Silverlinski, Jim Malatos. And I don't know who got the first number. Mr. Johnson. I want to introduce Barry Johnson. Barry Johnson, I can remember in 1972, Barry Johnson walked the whole town of Bourne, door to door, including my door, asking for votes. And he had a really good spiel in. Hopefully he shortened it up a bit. Here you go, Barry.
The truth of the matter is, I can't lie, we switched. Because I guess they knew if I get up here, I'm never going to sit down. So they just want me to get up here and just sit down. So that's what's going to happen. First of all, on behalf of all of us up here, Skip and every other member of the society, thank you very much for inviting us here tonight. This really is going to be kind of a nostalgic walk backwards through the history of the town. And as I came in tonight and I saw Tommy Barlow for a minute, I guess I didn't realize it because he told me, he said, it's been 40 years since you've been a selectman. And I said, 40 years. That's incredible, I guess, and I know that's what it is. And I served with Ernie Bourne and Jerry Kerr in March of 1972. So I guess that kind of makes me the senior guy because everybody since April 2nd, 1884 is dead. Unfortunately. So everybody that I served with. Now I think I want to tell you a little bit of a background stuff, and I think that's really what you want to hear, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun tonight. And I actually went back to Town Hall today and looked it up, and from the clerk's office. And because Bob Parody and I always are discussing this kind of stuff all the time. And in March of '69, there was a vote to establish a charter commission. And that vote passed 1,448 to 402. In 1970, the town voted to actually accept the charter, not accept the charter, and that was yes, 1,315, no, 1,346. It lost by 23 votes. And I remember that because that was a heck of a time when this town was very, very divided. And it was all over full-time selectmen or not, really, that's what it came down to. And actually it came down to a lot of personalities, and it really was a nasty, nasty time. But as Bourne does, always Bourne comes back together, and it did. In 1971, because Jerry Kerr really was one of the fathers of trying to get the charter going here in town. So when it lost, basically a bunch of people who were together that backed the charter said, Jerry, if we can't beat them, we're going to join them. So they ran Jerry Kerr for selectman. And at that time, there were about 5 different people that ran. And the significant people that ran was Jerry Kerr, and he got 1,100 votes. Jimmy McMahon got 725 because he was the incumbent, and Gus Wagner got 829. So you see Jerry's strategy and everybody knew Jerry, everybody knew where his gas station was, and all he had to do was win Pecassin and Katomet, and he was in, and everything else, because they split the vote 5 ways. So that's what happened. Now we go fast forward to 1972. Well, it looked around and they said, who are we going to get to run for selectman again? Because, you know, we really need the second vote, or at least we need to try and keep changing and get this momentum going. Well, at the time, I happened to be teaching school in Mashpee, and I was also a Mashpee police officer at night, etc. And the principal at the time was not going to retire. So I decided, well, what the heck, I'll give it a shot. So I did. That time I had come to Bourne, and I was a police officer at night at Bourne. Chief Maiolini pulled me in his office and he said, Barry, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to run in office. Give me your badge and your gun. He said, if you win, good luck. We'll see if we can work together. He said, if you lose, you're on the schedule the next night. So I said, fine, Chief, that's fine with me. Well, I ran against Phil Sanford. Phil Sanford was one of the most beloved men in this town, and I think everybody understands that. And I had a lot of people, and I had tremendous amount of help. And a guy who helped me out back here is Hayden Cogshaw. He was the chairman of my 5 times that I ran. And I have to be honest with you, I was more scared of my own committee than I was running. I was scared of the ex-Marine behind me. And the story was just before we were about to, go in, we used to meet Sunday mornings. And I can remember Hayden's words to this day in my living room in our house. And he looked at me and he said, and he had about 25 people. And he says, something, we've got a great photographer over here, my wife Barbara now, but okay, professional photographer. She took off 30 pounds, gave me hair. I look wonderful. We got great speech writers over here, they're terrific, okay? The best ad writers over here, they're great. Damn, if we only had a candidate. That's my own committee. So I knocked on a lot of doors, as Skip said, etc. And I don't know who was more surprised, me or Phil, but I won by 128 votes. So the very next morning, that was tradition of Bourne. And if you walk in town hall where the clerk's office is now and you look back there, that was where my first desk was. And it was kind of ironic because that was the first year in 1972 where we had voting machines and you had the levers. And I had people, we made a little postcard, you pull the lever, you vote Johnson, and back and forth. Well, about 10:30 after we got sworn in and everybody went home, I looked out the window and there's Phil Sanford rocking on his porch, because I could see him, right across the parking lot. He was waving at me. And he called me up and he said, Barry, he said, I don't know what the hell you're doing over there. He said, everybody I talked to today say they voted for me. Anyway, that's enough of the history. But I just thought it was important to let you know kind of the behind the scenes. And I'm just going to wind up with a couple of things. When we were there, as a full-time board, you acted as a board. Even though it was two votes to get something done, that was fine. But the one thing you could do is we set the policy and we carried it out. Our door was open, and I have to tell you how many people just walk in the door and sit down and just want to talk. And we posted a meeting. Selectmen will be in session from 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. We never told you what we're doing, but we're in session. So that's how it happened a lot of times. And I can just tell you that I just want to mention 2 things that I think there are some highlights of the time that I was there. And that has come to fruition. And first one is the 4 ponds down in Pecassin. Because, Bob Parity came in after Jerry left. And we worked together very, very hard on that. They let me kind of stick out there a little bit. But let me tell you, it was a 3-way member board that presented at the town meeting. And today, I think that project is one of the most lasting projects that will be there for the future generations of this community. I think that's very, very important. The second thing is, I'd really like to share with you the history of how the National Cemetery actually got here. I think it's important that you really know this. Believe it or not, the driving force behind that was George Sampson, who used to operate the town dump, okay? And you're going to say, what did George have to do with the cemetery? Well, in 1973, if you remember, the town economically went down horribly because that's when Otis went away. So we're all sitting there trying to figure out what are we going to do. Well, we figured, well, let's do this, do that. Well, Jerry had all the connections. And he called Margaret Heckler, who at that time was the representative in Congress, and she was the leading member of the Veteran Services Committee. So Jerry somehow found out that they wanted to have a cemetery somewhere in the northeast or upstate New York. So he called Margaret, and he said, Margaret, we've got a site out here at Otis, and we really want you to come down here and figure this out. Okay, Jerry. Well, she just hung up. On a Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock, the phone rings. Because remember, the three of us sat right beside each other all the time. And I could hear all the conversations each one of us had. And it was her. And she said, Jerry, tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, you're going to have a seismologist, a geologist, and every other ologist in the world flying into Otis, and they're going to look at your site. Okay, Margaret, that's fine. And he said, the town of Bourne will give a man and a backhoe, and we're going to help you out. I'm looking at him, man and a backhoe? What the hell are you talking about? Because of course they got to dig the holes for the graves. Never thought of it. I said, who's going to operate the backhoe? George. Oh God, George, of course. He grew up there. He knows every inch of that whole thing. He hunted there forever, okay? So, bottom line, the next day, in they fly, okay? And they come out. They didn't want to be there. They were so upset, they just wanted to get out of here. So out we go. George, the guy says, George, dig me a hole over here. George says, oh no. You don't want a hole over here. You want a hole over here. The reason is, they're blasting. There's boulders out there so big. You know, we knew that. So, bottom line, they looked at it, they liked it, they stood on the edge of the hole so it wouldn't cave in, and that's how the National Cemetery actually got here. So I just thought I'd end with a couple stories for you. Thank you, and I'm sorry it took so much time.
Excellent.
Thank you, Barry. I don't know who has number 2. Okay, and we'll have another photo opportunity at the end of the night here, and we'll have them all get together again in case, I know there's other people out there that want to take pictures and can't get to their camera because they're on the other camera.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Maria Oliva, and I approve this message. I always say that during an election year. I would be remiss if I just didn't mention first about the chamber, because I know that we're here to talk about full-time selectmen, but I wouldn't be at the chamber if I didn't start out as a select woman. And the chamber does a lot for the community, and there's a handout which just in numbers tells you a little bit about what we do, about how much we pump into the economy every year for the community. We're just not offices there and visitor centers. We represent almost 80 to 90,000 people a year that come in to visit our visitor centers that we operate at the base of the Sagamore Bridge, which was the new one as part of the Sagamore Rotary Project in the visitor center in Buzzards Bay. And we run the Scholar Fest, which brings in hundreds of thousands of dollars, which we give back to the community to help run public amenities, for scholarships, for food pantries, things of that nature. So we always believe in giving back to the community and making sure that we have a strong business community, create jobs, recruit jobs. Our chamber, along with the Plymouth Area Chamber, is now designated as an economic development entity, which is new by the state. And what that means is that we're going to be looking at commercial property all the way down to southeastern Massachusetts and Cape Cod, hopefully to recruit jobs in Bourne, because we've got to have a healthy business community, and that improves the quality of life. So we're really very, I'm proud to be there. It's a regional chamber. We represent Bourne, Sandwich, and Wareham, but Bourne is mostly in my heart because I'm a lifelong resident and I love the community. But I have to tell you that chambers are an integral part of the community and make a difference, and I'm just so glad that I'm working in Buzzards Bay, and I love it totally. Back when I ran, I was 29 years old and I was single, and I had so many people tell me that there's no way you're going to get elected and that my chances were slim and none, and Slim just left town. And I said, okay, I'm going to risk it. I have nothing to lose. If I lose, so I'll find another job. I was working at the time for Jeremiah Care, and he had passed on, so I had to work and fill out his term at the State House, and then Tom Kerr ran for his job. So I decided to run for Barry Johnson's job, which was a vacancy. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons I won that I believe is that I knocked on every single door. Nobody really knew too much about me and my record, so I knocked on every door, and I mean every door, and it could have been the middle of winter. And it was tough. And I remember a couple of stories when I knocked on the doors. Everybody has a dog. And I figured the dogs that would come and be vicious, absolutely vicious, I figured, they're not going to vote for me. Those people aren't going to vote for me. The dogs are just barking all the time. The other story was that, and this is a true story, where I used to park my car and go walking sometimes, and sometimes I would have people drive me. But I would knock on doors and there was a guy playing the piano, and all he had was a t-shirt on, sitting there. And so I walked in and said, oops, I better walk out. So that was the two stories I remember. But anyway, it was a good experience for me because I met people, and I really had my heart and soul in the job, and it was important, and I really enjoyed it. And when I first got into office, I learned to pick my battles and what was important and what was important to me. And I did it because I thought it would be good for the town. And I remember when Chief Mailini came in one time, because he knew me when I was a little girl. And, you know, he'd be ranting and raving about something. And I first got in and I go, hey, you sit down, take a seat, and just be quiet for a minute. He goes, you can't talk to me that way. I knew you when you were in diapers. And I go, oh my God, Chief Mailini, you can't talk to me that way. But anyway, after that, we had fun and we would talk about issues that were important for the community. The few things that I am proud of that I took part in was a conservation bylaw, which at the time businesses weren't happy about that, but you've got to have a balance of environmental and business working together. We purchased open space. I always supported that. But one big thing was the recycling committee. We started out with just a few people. And I remember many people were just vehemently against having mandated that you recycle. And the DPW, everybody was against it. So we worked 3 years on this committee to convince people that this was important. A law was passed. We've got one of the best recycling centers in the state. It's popular now to be green, but it was not popular back then to be green. And we knew how important it was for the landfill. And that was something that I worked on day and night, and with a committee of people that were just dedicated. And right now you go up there and everybody recycles. So that was a great thing back then. And then of course suing Main Street, we were involved with that. You remember Bob Parody when everybody was against the grinder pumps up on Taylor's Point. And it was part of the design, part of the technology. So a lot of people on Taylor's Point weren't happy with me at the time. But those are things that I remember when we were in office. And I had the pleasure of working with Bob and Jim and Tom Barlow during that time, and I really enjoyed working with them. As full-timers, you know, we were the policymakers. There was no filter. You had to go through us. We were directly answerable to constituents. We were everywhere. We came in every day. We worked on weekends, and we were elected by you. So there was no filter to go through. You had to talk to us, and we really worked hard together in the office. And whoever was in the office, you had to work with, because there were 3 of us in the office, and it meant that you had to work for what was in the best interest of the town. So I really enjoyed it. I think it worked. I think that less things fell through the cracks when there were 3 people in there working together. And I really am honored that it worked for more than 100 years, and I was part of that system. I was glad to have made a difference. It was a big part of my life, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm happy to be here. And I really want to thank the Historical Society, because you do a lot to preserve the history of the town. And a lot of younger people don't realize how important that is, and I appreciate all you do for the community very much. So thank you so much, and I enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Okay, as Hayden's coming up, I do want to mention one full-time selectman that passed away this past year, Roland DuPont. Roland really loved this town. He worked for this town till the day he died, just providing guidance and 3 Mile look, and he worked very hard on it, and I just want that to be noted in this presentation with the rest of the full-time selectmen. Thank you, Hayden.
Thank you very much, Skip. I also was going to speak a bit about Roland. I served with Roland as a member of the Board of Selectmen. We had some pretty terrific battles, but we also worked together. There wasn't a day that Roland didn't have as his #1 interest what was best for our community. And we unfortunately lost a good member of our community, probably, I guess it was a few months ago. My name is Hayden Cogsall, and I was elected to be a member of the Board of Selectmen in 1993. And I was treasurer of the town at the time, so it was kind of interesting. I went in early the morning, I had to be sworn in, so went in early, did some work in the treasurer's office, walked around the corner, got sworn in as a selectman, went out to eat with my wife and children, the traditional breakfast we have in the morning, and then went in to sit down in the selectman's office, and it turned out to be a totally different situation than I ever imagined it would be. Thank God for Bob Parity. I had Jim Mulatos on one side, Bob Parity on the other, and if it weren't for Bob's knowledge, wisdom, experience, I don't know what would have happened, because I certainly didn't have any as far as the job was concerned. When I came into the treasurer's office, again, it's like starting out brand new. I had no experience, no knowledge, and you learn as you go along, and as in every case, you have somebody to help you. Karen Gerard, who still is there and is still is a fountain of knowledge as far as that area is concerned, is still working. I wouldn't have made it. Barry, I think, would admit to you openly, he would not be the town clerk today as successful as he is if it weren't for Wendy Chapman.
Right on.
These are the people that go unnoticed throughout the community. And Debbie, Mary, and Nancy, that's alphabetically, in our office. If it weren't for them, these solid people who are what supports all of us. Selectmen come and go. At the time, treasurers come and go. Town clerks come and go. But beneath it all, I think, are the people who are not noticed enough. The people who are solid, and they're there year after year. They really know what's going on. And we kind of come into every position as a neophyte, and we learn from them. And if I can pass on one message tonight, is to remember that this is one of the things that makes our town great. It's not like where you hear the no workers or the high pay, no job workers at the state or the federal. They all work here, and they are what keeps our town going. I first started in, 40 years ago, as chairman of Barry's committee. Talk about the blind leading the blind. None of us had been involved in politics. None of us knew what we were doing, but somehow or other, we all made it, and we have continued. I probably am most pleased, from my point of view, at the things I was able to accomplish working on the base. I think a few days after I was elected, somebody said, well, what are we going to do? They're looking for people to come and represent the town of Bourne on a base committee. And nobody wanted it, and I said, sure, I'll grab that. And little did I know, it was a tremendous amount of work, but it was all very, very gratifying. I worked with some really wonderful people representing the community, and while it took perhaps longer than it should have, pretty much every plume and every issue having to do with bad stuff, whether it be gasoline despoiling or trichlor spoiling or whatever it was on the base, pretty much every issue is either cleaned up or in the process of being cleaned up. And I'm really very proud of being able to do that. Perhaps one last thing that was really maybe unique to full-time selectmen is the opportunity you had to go out and represent the community at Eagle Scout ceremonies where you were invited to, at retirement ceremonies that you were invited to. And in some cases, you knew every single person. I remember going to a school committee, a school system retirement situation where I knew every single person that was retiring. I either was at school with them, or they had one or two or three of my children in their class. And it was really wonderful to be able to stand there, personally know them, personally say something about them on behalf of our community. The full-time Board of Selectmen, we're not supposed to talk about this, I guess, in the letter, but the full-time Board of Selectmen, I think, really worked well. And one last comment, I was fortunate to be voted by the town meeting to be the last full-time selectman for about the last 9 months of my term. It was a part-time board, but I was voted to stay and kind of help with the process of integrating the part-time board. And our first full-time administrator was Bill Griffin, who had been around a bit and had had some experience, and was appointed by us after interviews to represent the community. And about a month and a half or so into his job, he called me into his office one day and said, I don't understand what this is all about. I said, what do you mean you don't understand? He said, well, I've gone through the books, I've gone through town reports, I've talked to people out here. He said, I don't understand why they got rid of you guys. You had a hell of a good running town. I said, yeah, I know it, but that's the way it is. And that was one of the nicest things that I ever heard, because this is a very knowledgeable person who had done a lot of research and came to that conclusion, and it made me feel very good. We did our best. I hope you all feel we did a good job for you. And thank you very much, and thank you, Skip, and the historical staff.
Thank you, Hayden. Now, I want to point something out. These people weren't just running for selectmen to be selectmen. Hayden had served for years on the Board of Health and was committed to the environment in the town. Barry Johnson had served the town in different capacities and still does. Bob Parody, I remember when we were kids, Bob Parody was the head lifeguard. I mean, this guy, before he was out of school, he was loving the town. My brother Tom, who's going to speak next, he served on several boards. You know, the reason you're here is we really appreciate the lifelong commitment that you guys as a group have made for the town. You've made the town a better place. Now, here, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here tonight. I ran 10 times. And I ran against everyone on this board except I don't know, growing up in this town, I had a real desire to serve. And, unfortunately, that desire to serve didn't translate into service. I lost a lot of elections, and, but I did serve from 1988 to 1991 with Bob Parody and Maria Leva, and then I served 2 terms with Hayden Cogshaw, Roland DuPont, Leo Locke, and then I served another term as a part-time selectman from 2003 to 2006. From my point of view, the Board of Selectmen, as Barry pointed out, almost ended full-time in 1970. Most of the towns around here, throughout Massachusetts, went to the other form of government. And again and again it was brought up to change to the modern form of government, which is the part-time board with a full-time administrator. And I remember, I think it was 93, when it was pretty certain that there was a charter question coming up, and Marie got on the phone and called 6 or 7 different people in town to run for the Charter Commission. And I was sitting there at Hayden's election campaign that night. And I was sitting around this table, because we're all supporting Hayden, and every one of us, Jim Sivelinski, myself, Lita Gasper, I can't even remember them all, were all elected to the Charter Commission. So, you know, it was like a 7-2 or 6-3 vote before we even started the Charter Commission. So, I mean, Marie made sure that we got another, I don't know, 94 to 2000, another 7 or 8 years.
It wasn't political at all.
It wasn't political at all, you know. Everybody was impartial, you know. But then the night was, it was years later, and we were having the next run around with the charter, and it just went the opposite way. I think it was 2000 or 1999, and Hayden and Leo were on, and they're older gentlemen at this time, and they weren't fired up about this whole thing, you know. They're in their mid-60s anyway, and they thought it was, you know, that we really shouldn't, you know, get involved. It's kind of self-serving to try to protect your jobs. If the people want to get rid of you, get rid of you. And I was still interested in serving, and so I called Bob Parity to serve, and he's, betcha, I believe in full-time selectmen. And then we had a sleeper of Mr. Perry, a third vote, but we were outvoted like 6-3, and it was a done deal that night. The 6 people that were going to go the other way, and if they were able to get 6 people on the charter, the following year, it was going to prevail. And but that's kind of how politics work. It's not like you're right or you're wrong. It's what the majority of the people want. I never understood that. Never understood. I thought I was well prepared. The first time I ran, I had a background in finance, management, accounting. I had all these skills that prepared me for this management type of position. And I get in there and I kept on making political mistakes. Like Hayden said, Bob was very thoughtful, meticulous, very, a good manager, and a good politician. We had a situation over in Pecasset with a road closing, and there was a proposed building for Larry's Market. Larry wanted it, but like 300 people in the area didn't want it, And we went to a summer meeting at St. John's, and Bob's getting up there asking questions. He's being real nice to the people, and taking the questions and saying, yes, we'll take this into consideration. We'll review it further, and we'll look at this closer. And I'm getting up every time. No, there was a town meeting vote, and this is what we're going to do, whether you like it or not. This went on for like 40 minutes. Of course, Marie knew better not to be there. I mean, that was kind of my way of politics. I didn't get it, that you need to. And then Marie used to beat me. She know that, like, Bob agreed with me on one issue, and I agreed with an issue, with her. And like, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to win both of these, And we get to the meeting, and she's traded off with Bob, and I lose both times. laughs. I'm sitting there. No, this is not good. I don't get this very well. Yeah, it happened a lot, I'll tell you. The issue I remember with a lot of issues, with Roland and Hayden. One that was, I think, brought us down eventually was we had an issue with the school. A lot of the administration, the finance committee, the selectmen, all wanted the middle school. It had gone to the general public twice for an override, and it failed both times. But there was still a need to get a middle school. We knew from Wareham, I was good friends with Joe Murphy over in Wareham, who had passed away, but he had the same situation in Wareham, where they needed something, and they just went to town meeting and didn't go for an override, and incurred this debt, school debt, and have to pay it within Proposition 2.5. And it just killed them. It killed their operating budget. It killed any type of capital expenditures. They were just starving for money, and they couldn't get an override. So we knew that we couldn't go in that direction. So Roland had put forward a proposal, that we'd have a landfill that would offset the cost that would pay for a middle school. And we went forward with this proposal, but all the time, myself and Hayden would have daily meetings with the financial staff pointing out that the numbers didn't add up. But when we got to the town meeting, it didn't matter whether the numbers added up or not. The vast majority of people at that town meeting wanted that middle school. They voted for that middle school, and that middle school was built. And at that time, you could look out and saw the opponents of the full-time selectmen were just infuriated. And that's when the ball started running against the Board of Selectmen. But the middle school did get built, and after that, an elementary school got built. But politics works that way. It's very emotional. You try to do the right thing. You know what the right thing is, but sometimes it's the majority rules. And even though the entire town was against it, those people that night at that town meeting voted in favor and it went forward. We were supposed to pick out a couple of things that we were happy with or proud of. The sewage project, when me and Bob and Marie were working on it, was more difficult than people knew. We had to come to an agreement with the Wareham Board of Selectmen, who weren't agreeable. We were going to piggyback off them and get a sewage system. And they were not interested at all, but they were told by DEP they had to do it in order to get their money, and we had to do it in order to get the money. And Joe Gracia, who was a town administrator, he was a selectman, he was town council, he happened to be on the board. And I don't know if Bob knew it, but I sure knew it. He couldn't stand Bob. He was very jealous of Bob. Bob was a practicing attorney, also chairman of the Board of Selectmen, something that he desired to do. He would like to have been the mayor of the town of Wareham. He was that type of guy. And he almost got Bob to say that's it. And that was the whole strategy, was to get us to walk away from the table, go back to DEP saying they couldn't come into agreement, let us have the money. And we prevailed, we got an agreement. And then through Tony Fernandez, he was the DPW director in Wareham. He would talk to me a lot about this, and he said, did your consultants talk about farmers, administration? I said, no. I went and talked to Bob. Didn't we finance that with Farmers Home? He goes, yep. So we called up Mr. Conway from Farmers Home. Would you be interested in helping us out with the funding of the sewer project? Make an agreement, he comes down. He gives us millions of dollars for that sewage project. Contract 2, they didn't have to pay any money, the residents. It was tremendous. It was, I don't know how much it was, $6 million, $7 million. And that was just pursuing something that was not being recommended, out of the ordinary. But that was something like the full-time selectmen did because they were around, they talked to other people in other towns, and they had the opportunity to bring things forward. And that was just, to me, that was unbelievable. To get that type of money that quickly, and really, there was hardly any press about it at all. And but I know the people that were on the sewage system were very happy that they didn't have to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in betterment fine, for their sewage. The other issue I was proud of, there was a problem with pollution when I was coming in, and Ted Pratt, this fellow from Marion, had this concept of modeling a cleanup program similar to Chesapeake Bay. And he had talked to Senator Kerry, and we got a hold of the EPA, and Joe Costa was the person for the Buzzard Bay project. He was designated the technical staff. We entered into a compact, being the Buzzards Bay Advisory Committee, which was all the towns surrounding Buzzards Bay, and then we had a citizens group, Buzzards Bay Coalition, and that was the advocacy group. I got to serve on the EBAC from the beginning. I got to serve as a director of the coalition, and I got to sit on the funding of the Buzzard Bay project. So it was like, now you'd probably say it was a conflict of interest that I could sit on the projects to fund that I was putting forward through my town as an applicant. We got more money for boat cleanup, Hens Cove, Buzzards Bay. These are all cleaning the water up. I'm just trying, it's coming into millions of dollars. I mean, the pump out boats, Kingman's Marina, there's a seaside cleanup there. It's just basically taking the road runoff, the oil and the gasoline that used to go directly into the water, intercepting it and preventing it from going in it, and taking the sewage that was dumped into the water and removing it. And that happened, that began back in 1989. And as Bob had said, Maria had said, none of this, I mean, we can't do anything alone as a member of the Board of Selectmen. It had to be agreeable to all three of us for anything to be done when we were in office. And we did that together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I do want to point out, Tom is my brother, and both my father and I were commercial shellfishermen in Buzzards Bay, and we certainly saw no conflict with my brother trying to clean the bay up for us. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Skip. Again, thank you to the Society for inviting us here this evening. This is something I would have never thought of, and it's a great thing that you've done, and I'm very proud to be here this evening. Many of you that are here, as I look around, knew my uncle, Bill Parody. And a lot of people thought he was my father, and most of the time I didn't bother to correct him. They'd say, "How's your dad doing?" I'd say, "He's doing fine." But he was my uncle. And Bill was very involved in town politics. And in December of 1974, I was admitted to the Massachusetts bar and entered into law practice here in Buzzards Bay, and was getting my feet wet and enjoying that. And I had been on the planning board, served with Don Ellis in the early 70s. So that was my first elected office in town. And I thought about selectmen, and I finally decided I was going to run in 1976. I made up my mind. Ernest Forney, when he had run 3 years earlier and only won by 69 votes. And I thought he was vulnerable, and I was going to run that year, because I knew if I waited, I'd be too deep into the law practice, and I wouldn't want to give that up to be a selectman and so on. So first one I talked to was my uncle, and he said, "What are you, crazy? You don't want to run for selectman." Okay, that was it. So I kind of decided I would never run for selectman. And a year later, Jerry Camp was not running for re-election, 1977, and I wasn't given a thought at all, and the phone rang one day. It was my uncle. "You ought to run for selectman." Okay, which I did. And believe it or not, we talk about the difficulty in getting candidates for any office in town government. There were 8 individuals who ran that year. There were 8 of them. 8 people ran for selectmen. And it was, quite an interesting race, and I prevailed, and only with, I don't remember the percent, it was probably 36%, because it was just a plurality out of 8 people. So of course, one of the first things I decided was hopefully I could, within the next 3 years, turn that around to more than 50%, would support me 3 years later based on my performance. But I felt 3 years, 6 years max, that would be it for me, and I'd go back and practice law. And give that back to the town. The town was good to me, it gave me an excellent education that got me where I was, and if I could give some of that back, well, as you know, 18 years later, thanks to Tommy, finally forced me out, put me out on the street, and I finally finished my career as selectman. I served with everyone sitting here. Barry was there when I was first elected. He was I guess Ernie Forney was the senior selectman. Barry was next. And just to look back, when you ran for selectman, what'd you do? You promised the world. And you had all these things you were going to do, and as so many people at that time, we were going to do something about Buzzards Bay. And after I got elected, I said, what in God's name am I going to do about Buzzards Bay? And I remember it like it was yesterday. Barry and I went up in front of the Buzzards Bay Theater and just stood there sort of staring towards the canal and, you know, what are we going to do? And it's funny how things right in front of us were two things staring us in the face. One was an ugly old oil tank that Grossman's was using for storage of lumber. And there was a big I forgot the name of the company, a big advertising sign, and you could not even see the railroad bridge because of those two ugly things. And those are some of the first things that didn't cost anything. We just put some pressure on in a few places. We got the sign taken down. Grossman's took the tank down, and things started to move along. And we tried so hard. That to me is, in my whole 18 years, when I think of the time and the money we poured into Buzzards Bay and the park and the sewerage, and we did everything possible for public improvements with the hope that there would be some private investment would follow that. And we're still struggling today with the same problems we were dealing with then. That's what I know we accomplished a lot. I like to look back and say we did this and we did that, but the ultimate goal still remains. So that's something that I hope, and of course in this economy it makes it even harder to have a political solution to solving again a problem like that. But we had an article, it was, I won't get into the detail, but it was a one article town meeting. We got a grant. And initially, no one had a project, and we finally came up with a couple of projects. And we had to have a town meeting because we had to appropriate the money. One article. And all of a sudden, at the 11th hour, everybody had ideas. So we prepared, and when we went to town meeting, we used to have big 3-ring binders with everything you could think of for every article. Well, this was only one article, and Barry was chairman. And Barry worked for hours and hours and hours into a speech that he was going to make on behalf of the selectmen. And he had a good speech to stave off any of these other ideas and to support what we were going to do. And the moderator called the article, the finance committee gave their report and their motion, and the moderator asked for any discussion. And I'm looking out at the audience. If you've been in politics for a while, you read eyes, you look at faces, and you get a feel. And I could see that nobody was making a move to stand up or anything else. Well, Barry started to get out of his seat. And I grabbed Barry by his belt and yanked Crash back into one of these metal chairs up in the auditorium, in the cafeteria. I said, sit down. Barry's going, what? I said, sit down. Shut up. What? He's got his big speech. He's worked hours on this. I said, shut up. And the moderator said, seeing no discussion, all of them gave aye, boom, unanimous vote, boom, town meeting adjourned. And I said to Barry, if he'd given that speech, we'd still be there. We'd still be there right now, because once somebody starts, then the ball gets rolling. So sometimes, you learn in order to get things done. Politics, it's always annoyed me. I've enjoyed politics. I've loved politics. My undergraduate degree is in politics and government. But it's not, and you put two people, how about husband and wife? Really? In a room, and the interaction of those two people to come to certain decisions and end results. What is that? Politics. That it's not a nasty word. It's how things are accomplished, and how, I don't mean anything underhanded or anything like that. It's just human nature, and how you convince someone that your argument or your project is better. And it is a part, it plays a big part in the administrative aspects of running a community such as Bourne, to get things done. Also, I always said there were three of us. No matter what our backgrounds were, no matter what our education was, what our degrees were, there were three of us. And we were all over the place. You can't, I don't care how you do it, you can't replace three people with one person. And there were three of us. And most days, two were off running. I chaired a very important regional transportation committee on Cape Cod for 20 years. Why? Well, I like to think because I was the most brilliant one, but nobody else wanted it. Nobody else wanted it because they were part-time selectmen. They couldn't put the times. They said, Bob, you be chairman. Well, being chairman, of course, allowed me to bring many things into Bourne that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And another select like Tommy would be at a meeting on the Buzzards Bay Coalition representing Bourne. And one selectman would be probably at town hall in case someone came in to say their street light was out. But you got to see, I know the one thing people loved was probably 90% plus times you would come into the town hall, you could see a selectman, if not the entire board. And most days, no matter what we were doing, if somebody came, Nancy would come in and say, such here to see you, send them in. And they could see the whole board. Department heads, ask Chief Ford as the police chief. He came from other communities to Bourne, became the police chief. He absolutely loved it to be able to pick up the phone, get a selectman, sometimes get an answer on the phone, sometimes come on down, chief, right now, usually walk away with an answer. Those were the types of things that I liked about I'm not supposed to talk about the system. I liked about the system, but the most important thing I like, and I still like, and it's why I'm moderator and I'm still involved, is I love the people. I love all the people who are involved in this community in all the capacities they serve. And I applaud everyone who serves and serves on committees and for no compensation, and it's a lot of work. But that's why we have such a great community. And I've been blessed to have served in all kinds of capacities with so many wonderful people, and that's why I love this community and why I will keep being involved. And I hope those, I know many of you out here, I hope you will too. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parody. And I just do want to point out, he left one thing unsaid, and that was that the full-time selectmen, we were going to have a Cadillac Marina, and I can remember Bob getting up at town meeting and saying, we're not going to have a Cadillac, we don't have money, guys, but we're going to have a Volkswagen. Well, you know, the Volkswagen makes this town a lot better than it would be if we didn't have it. And it was Barry and Bob and people like Gus Wagner who worked really hard. Not to benefit themselves, but for the future of the town. In 1968, you know, 88, it just, a marina wasn't a big deal, but they had the foresight to work really hard to put one in, and it's a big deal. And now, Jim Sobolinski, I know your number's up. Thank you, Jim.
You know, following Bob Parody is like sending a little eager up following Ted Williams. Seriously. First of all, I want to thank Skip and your committee and the Bourne Historic Society for having this wonderful fundraiser and making me a part of it. I served as a full-time selectman from 1985 to 1988. What was unusual about our race, and I think it was probably in modern times the first time that two selectmen were voted in at the same time, which left Bob Parody the envious task of breaking in two rookies. Coming from private industry, it was quite a change for me. I was certainly used to doing things a little bit faster, making decisions a little bit quicker. And as everybody knows out here, that government can just go a little tad slower than normal. But one thing I did find out very quickly, that wasn't such a bad thing. I had a great advantage, as Marie did. We had Bob Parody as a teacher, and that was a huge plus for me. His experience with the budget, his knowledge of issues, his preparation for town meeting, his leadership role as a chairman were all incredible. Nobody knew that office better than Bob did. With Bob Parody, you had a full-time selectman assessor, you had a finance director, and you had a town administrator, all rolled into one. In the 3 years that I served with him, and I think Marie will back this up, he never lost his cool, maybe once. He stayed focused, he was always accessible, and Bob never, and I repeat, Bob never bought lunch.
That's true.
Every time that lunch bill came, Bob had to go to the bathroom. And for the longest time, I thought that at that young age, Bob had a prostate problem or something, because he was always at that bathroom. But in my 3rd year, I said to Marie, you know, we're going to go to lunch. We're going to get Bob to buy lunch. Went to a restaurant, got a corner table. We boxed him in. We put an out-of-order sign on the bathroom. We instructed the waitress to drop the bill in front of Bob, and it worked perfectly. Except, as we sat there and the bill came, Marie and I were kind of just talking and looking around, and we seen Bob breaking into sweat a little bit. And then all of a sudden his hand started to shake a little bit, and then the hand started to go to the back wallet, and I said, this is it. And all of a sudden the arm paralyzed. I mean, it just stopped. And I said to Bob, I said, are you okay? And he said, well, you know, about 2 days ago I went to my doctor and he thinks I have frozen shoulder. And he instructed me not to go back this far. So needless to say, between the prostate problem and frozen shoulder, Bob never bought lunch. I would like to comment about serving with Maria Lever. Serving full-time with Maria Lever was a great experience. She's one great lady and also a great friend. I think being the first woman selectman in the town of Bourne brought a little additional pressure on her, but nobody rose to the occasion better than she did. She was hardworking, dedicated, very smart, loved committee work, and she never shied away from any issues. Being the first woman selectman was very irrelevant to me. She was the right person for the job, and she did it. Politics came natural to Marie, and she loved what she did. She loved serving her constituency. And I say, from the bottom of the heart, this gal was probably one of the best selectmen going. She served admirably, and I can't say enough. I would like to share a story about Marie. Just one. You know, you like to kind of pump them up right under the ground. And you know, this story here, I think the Historical Society might be interested in it. And this is an absolute true story. We were invited to the VFW for a lunch and a ceremony for the changing of the commanders. And we were only in office a few weeks. And you're all pretty much familiar with the fact that the VFW and the changing of the guard ceremonies are all done very, very well. They're very receiving over there. They had a nice lunch, and the ceremony was absolutely fabulous. And we're all sitting there, and the outgoing commander came over and he said, "We really appreciate you being here, and we'd certainly turn around, and as soon as the ceremony's coming to the end, we'd like to have you come up and give a speech." Marie was paralyzed. She looked and she said, "Oh crap, I'm not prepared to give a speech. I mean, I can't believe it. We have to speak." And Bob said to Marie, "Look it, just relax, flow with it, you'll do fine." Marie says to Bob, "You've been a selectman for 100 years. You've got all types of things to talk about." She turns to me and she says, "You know, you're a veteran. You can talk about bombs and boot camps and shooting guns and everything." She says, "I'm really nervous, but I really don't have much to say." And as soon as she got through saying that, the commander said, "I'd like to introduce Maria Lever, our first woman selectman, to please come up and speak." Well, if you've ever watched any movie where some person is on death row and it's the last day, walking to the electric chair, well, here goes Marie up to give her speech. This is the truth, and I have it verbatim. This was Maria Lever's speech to the VFW, her first speech as a selectman in the town of Bourne. "Hi, I'm Maria Lever. I'm your selectman. I love being your selectman, and I hope I'm always your selectman. Thank you very much." It was 15.9 seconds. And I'm positive, is like Bob Parody said, this is a record. A first time that a selectman in the town of Bourne is only spoken for 15.9 seconds. I'd also like to mention, before I just get into just a few things, that, you know, the 80s were an exciting time in the town of Bourne. There was so many things happening, and I'd just like to hit on a couple of items and situations that took place when I was in office for the 3 years. The first issue I thought that was always exciting was the South Side Connector. That was a hot button issue. I remember when I was running for selectman, I remember my campaign telling me, "You've got to know about that South Side Connector. That's important. You've got to learn about that South Side Connector." And anybody, I'm sure all is aware of the South Side Connector. That was going to be the road from the Buzzards Bay Rotary straight through 7 miles. It's going to take you over to the Route 6 Cape Highway. And it's always been an issue that has been on the table. And what's interesting is that when I ran for selectman, you had to be aware of it, and today, 27 years later, if you decide to run for selectman, you're going to have to be aware of it also, because it's never been done, and whether it will be or not, we don't know. Another great issue that surfaced in the 1980s was CMAS. And CMAS, it was a new technology plant for solid waste management being built in Rochester. And it was an interesting concept. Bottom line, you close your landfill, you build a transfer station, and you send your trash to CMAS at a cost per ton. There was a lot of pressure regionally and locally to support this. We as a board did a tremendous study with a lot of experts. A lot of the good people at Town of Bourne came forward to really study this. We found that our landfill had life and value, and we were the only town on Cape Cod not to vote to go to CMAS, and I think that was a great decision back then, as we see today. Tommy brought up the fact of the Charter Commission, which I was a member of. I thought it was a very exciting time, keeping in mind that we were the last town in Massachusetts to have a full-time board. And in the study of the charter, it was basically bottom line, full-time selectmen against part-time, open town meeting versus representative town meeting. And when we went around and did due diligence, I remember visiting towns and sitting with different town managers or town administrators and even part-time selectmen. And the first thing what I would say is that, yeah, I'm a full-time selectman from the town of Bourne. And they go, what? And you'd be surprised, especially off the Cape, how many people didn't realize, even back in the 80s, that there was still full-time selectmen that were operating. And as you well know, and the results of that charter vote was pretty unanimous to maintain full-time selectmen. The other thing that I'd like to bring up, I thought, which to me, serving just opened my eyes unbelievably, is when Hurricane Gloria hit September 1985. It was downgraded to a Category 1, but when that was raising hell in the Atlantic, that started off as a Category 4, and it was up 150, 160 mile an hour winds. Chatham's Coast Guard, it was downgraded, thank God, to Category 1, but the Chatham Coast Guard station registered 75 mile an hour winds and gust up to 110 miles an hour. Power lines were down, power's out, trees falling, tree limbs blowing all over the place. And this is when I appreciated and I marveled at the courageous men and women of this community who were out in that hurricane risking their lives, making sure everyone else is okay. Our emergency response team were heroes in every sense of the word. And I think in also one of the outstanding projects that was accomplished in 1987, the opening of our new library at the old Stoll School. The opening of that new library was a proud day in Bourne. So many people put in so much effort to make that thing happen, and the fundraisers that went on were such good times. And what's interesting is the Historical Society's archives eventually taking over the old library location. Another issue that I thought was interesting in the 80s, and how can we forget, the opening of the extension of Route 25. Took place in 1987, and I think, you know, the day of the opening came with great fanfare. There was dignitaries and local officials, and there was it was just a glorious day. Everybody knowing that finally this traffic mess was going to come to an end. Buzzards Bay and Wareham were choked for years with traffic, as we all know, and this was the day. It was a great day to remember. It started in 1957, and in 1987 was the opening of the extension of Route 25. 30 years later, and like I said earlier, I realized coming into government it worked a little slow. I didn't realize it was going to work that slow, but like I say, it was a fabulous day to see that happen. But the keynote speaker that day was Governor Michael Dukakis. And I thought, when he landed, he came into the area, I should say, I was a big supporter of his. And I said to him, Governor, whatever you do, do not drive a tank from Otis over here to the bridge. And he said, okay, that's good advice, Jim. When he ran for president, he didn't follow that advice. Last but not least on my hot button issues here, the environment and the base has always been an important issue with the town of Bourne. And I think that both Hayden and Tommy and everybody that served had been aware of that. And I think one of the issues certainly was how well Bourne stood up to that issue. Bourne has always been known as a military town. We've always had a good relationship with the base. The base has always had a good relationship with us. But it came to a point where Bourne had to take a stand with other communities and say enough is enough. We had military children being educated out there along with our own. We had our schools out there. And we also had statistics coming back that were showing some specific cancer rates in our region that were higher than normal. But I think through the efforts of not only the Board of Selectmen, but communities throughout this area, along with every board and every individual that could have a say, had a say, and brought pressure on the military to put those monitoring wells in. And you know, dealing with the military, as well as a lot of you probably know, is not easy. They can stonewall very well. They're not that easy to cooperate. But through the efforts of the town of Bourne and this community, those monitoring wells were put in, and the findings were dramatic. To make a long story short, because of this community and the people in this community and the work that was done, is the results of what we have today. Things are being cleaned up, and we're going in the right direction. I would like to end by saying that I guess one of the issues that I'd like to talk about, because there's an awful lot of things that go on in this office as a full-time selectman, and Bob Parity hit it right on the button. You know, it's a full-time job, and it's also pretty much 24/7. You're going in a lot of different directions, but the availability was there for full-time selectmen to address the constituencies very quickly and get a lot of things done very quickly. I'd like to close by saying I couldn't have been more prouder, and I couldn't have had a better experience. And I talked to many people, because I no longer live in Bourne, I live in Millis, but I've talked to a lot of people throughout this state, and I always relate back to this town, you as the people of this town, what a wonderful community it has been, what a wonderful time it was serving here. And I'd just like to end by giving you my funniest thing I experienced as a selectman. And it doesn't really relate to being in office per se, but during a fundraiser at the Wherry Travelers, and watching Barry Johnson in full drag doing his imitation of Kate Smith singing "God Bless America," it was priceless. We did a lot of fundraisers while we were in office, raising money for specifics, and Barry was the best. If you could, maybe some of you have seen this, but if you could see Barry doing his imitation of Kate Smith, he had the flowing wig, he had a dress that only Kate Smith would wear, and it fit him nicely. He had huge boobs, and he had makeup on him that even Kim Kardashian would die for. But when the show ended, we couldn't get Barry out of the dress. Not because he was stuck in it. He liked being in that dress. And I personally have to admit, I've never seen better cleavage. But what was the funniest thing of all, now keep in mind, Barry's doing his imitation of Kate Smith singing "God Bless America." When that song ended, at the end of the performance, as I was emceeing the show, he turns to me and he says, "Jim, I knocked them dead. They're all standing for me. And I said, Barry, of course they're standing. You just got through singing, God Bless America. I would like to thank all of you again for having me and this board. It's been wonderful. And I will turn it back to Skip.
Thank you, Jim. And thank all of you for that. I want to let you have a round table and talk, Barry, but I just want to point out that in 10 minutes the silent auction is going to close. So there's plenty of coffee. There's a wicked pile of cupcakes back there. They're the best cupcakes I've ever had. And there's coffee. Help yourself. Don't forget the silent auction. I do want to note that there's a former sandwich selectman here tonight who's running for state rep. His name's Patrick Ellis. Am I close? Right here. He's here. And thank you. And you can talk to him. And I want to point out that Jack Healy's here. Jack Healy was a former town administrator in Wareham, town administrator in Middleborough. He's now the town administrator in Westport. And Jack was the guy who, when I was a fisherman, him and I went to federal court for 7 years and fought about the rights to shellfish. And we're still friends. And that's what politics are all about. You disagree, but you love each other. Thank you guys. And here's Barry. And I do want to recognize that Tony Meyer and John Porter are also here from the town Bourne Town Board of Selectmen. Yeah.
I just want to start the roundtable discussion by commenting on some of the things that my fellow past selectmen have done. And the first one is, when Jim Sobolinski ran, and he's absolutely right about the God Bless America, so we try to raise a lot of money for a lot of causes. When he first ran, we all said, who the H is this Jim Sobolinski? Who's this guy? We had no idea. Well, after him serving for 3 years and telling you a little bit about it tonight, you can see why he was elected as a selectman, and he did a tremendous service to this community, and we have adopted him. Just a couple, 2 or 3 things as a follow-up. Jim mentioned on Route 25. I just want to tell you, nobody fought harder than me and Mrs. Ingersoll. And, you know, in the end, we ended up respecting each other. And, you know, because of her efforts, that environment has been saved. I know it's 6 miles longer than maybe we all wanted it, but I'm going to tell you, she did a tremendous service to this community. And one of the things the selectmen are supposed to do every 5 years, I don't know if they still do it, but you're supposed to preamble the bounds. And you're supposed to preamble the bounds between the towns that abut you. The oldest town is supposed to come to you and invite the youngest town. Well, Plymouth did that, and then they're supposed to take you out to lunch. I think that's one of the last times we ever did it. You go out and you paint the P and the B on the granite things. One of them just so happens to be over the fence in Mrs. Ingersoll's land. I was about 100 pounds lighter, and the guy from Plymouth, we pulled up to her fence, and they put me and him with our little paint cans and a little thing, jumped us over the fence, and we started painting the P and the B for Plymouth and Bourne. All of a sudden, up over the hill comes that yellow Jeep, and there's Mrs. Ingersoll with a shotgun on the front seat. We all know she carried that shotgun. What are you doing jacking my deer? Mrs. Ingersoll, we're not jacking your deer. I'm a selectman, remember? Well, anyway, it ended on that. She let us off. But nobody fought harder than us and her. I want to share a couple of funny stories with you, and that Tommy and everybody talked about, and Bob, and I'll leave on this. One of them was the renovation of Buzzards Bay, and Bob talked about the park. And as you know, that park, there was a purchase and sales agreement by the Oyster Bar and the people who own the Oyster Bar, which is on Main Street, for $15,000 to buy the Buzzards Bay Park. Luckily, under the state law, they had to notify the town first. We held a one-article town meeting. Remember, everybody came out. They were so mad at us because the minute we hit the quorum, we started, no discussion, $15,000. The town bought the park. People were so mad at us because when they were all coming in to vote, the town meeting was over. Yet we got the park. That's how that happened. Also, I don't know how many times members of everybody up here have been told how wonderful it would be to have a restaurant on top of the railroad bridge. I mean, just think of it. You can go up and down, look at the thing going up and down, okay? So, I also just want to mention again about one other thing, and I'll end on this. We had an open door. Somebody came in, and they just came in and sat down in front of us. And we said, hi, how are you? They said, listen, I got a great idea. I want to renovate Buzzards Bay. I think we can bring a lot of money to Buzzards Bay. We said, sure, anything, let's listen to it. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'm going to bring Evel Knievel here. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to line him up behind the Mezzaluna. He's going to go over the bridge. He's going to jump the canal. Okay, we'll accept that. Well, he was really serious about that. We could not discourage him. Then finally he left, and we just thanked him for his input into it. And then we had someone else that came in and said, what are you damn selectmen going to do to protect my air rights? Air rights? What are you talking about? Well, don't you selectmen read the papers? What's the matter with you? You live in a cocoon. Don't you know they're going to build a tramway from Logan Airport right over the canal, right out to Otis Air Force Base? What the hell are you doing? Okay, that's another idea. You know, it just goes on, and these are kind of the insights of what went on in our daily life in the selectman's office. So, I don't know.
One thing, I just
Go
want to
ahead,
say.
Marie. And by the way, Marie used to work for me.
I forgot to tell you all, when I first saw Barry, when I was working at the town hall years ago, I saw him, and the first time I saw him, I said, oh my God, he's good looking, I have a crush on him. I was only 19 at the time. Then, as I got older and I met him, I realized, no, I'm just kidding, of course I am. But listen, I just want to say one thing. I learned from that speech, because when I got up, ever since after that VFW speech, I was prepared for, it didn't matter whether I had to speak or not, no matter where I went, I was prepared and did my homework, and it never ever happened again. So one good thing is that when something like that happens, you learn from it, and you grow, because you're always learning things every new day. So thank you, Jim, for bringing that up from an historic standpoint to all these people. I very much appreciate it. But I did enjoy working with my selectmen friends, because it really meant a lot to me personally. It's one of the better times of my life to work with Bob and Jim and with Tom. And I know Hayden very well and Bob, and I love them all, and they're great people, and I love my community. Thank you.
All I wanted to comment to is that now that I'm out of office, and as I get a little older, I'd like to see more politicians go back to the 15-second speech.
I know everybody wants to know, but I just said, does anybody have any questions?
Did you buy lunch today?
Got my money right here, nice and... No questions? Okay. Thank you.
On behalf of the Historic Society and the Board of Directors in the town of Bourne, I really want to say thank you for your years of service to the town. And when the town administrator, the first one, showed up here, Bill Griffin, they're right. He could not believe the financial situation of this town. We had more money in the bank than he couldn't believe it. And he told me, I was a part-time selectman, he said, I could not believe it. You know, we had we're a pretty good town. And we still do. We still got money in the bank. So, thank you guys.